The history of Canadian horror films is a pretty short one, actually. If there was a golden age, it would be the mid-70s, and Black Christmas would be sort of sitting near the peak.
There hadn't really been many horror films in Canada up until that point. This was really a different kind of direction for a Canadian horror film, and a different direction for horror films in general.
It wasn't a film that came after. It didn't try and improve upon. It really set the tone for the time for the films that followed.
Anything else which kind of followed, in a lot of respects, was kind of redundant.
It's really a landmark, I think, in horror and in Canadian horror specifically.
The killer hiding in the sorority house may be a present-day cliché, but in Bob Clark's seminal work Black Christmas, the events of one holiday season set the table for numerous imitators. Starring Olivia Hussey, Keir Dullea, and Margot Kidder, Black Christmas follows the co-eds in a sorority house as they are haunted by the psychotic phone calls of the killer, Billy. As the clueless police are brought in to try and solve the case, one by one the girls begin to go missing. One of the scariest and most influential horror films ever made, Black Christmas was the third feature directed by Bob Clark. After making the horror films Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things and Death Dream in Florida, Clark immigrated to Canada in 1972. He began adapting a script by young screenwriter Roy Moore. Then titled Stop Me, the film would go on to become one of Canada's few films to obtain cult status internationally.
Bob Clark got his start in Florida, exploitation film capital of the world.
He'd made a few films down in Florida. Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things.
Children was a pretty big hit on the drive-in circuit, so they made this film called Death Dream.
The easiest kind of movies to get financed and to get distributed in the system were horror films. There was no question about it. I didn't want to do porno, that was the other, so it was a tactical move. I liked the genre, I enjoyed it. So Night of the Living Dead had just come out a few years before, so we thought we'd do an homage, kind of with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek to that. That would seem like a good idea to do.
We do entreat thee, deliver them up to us, to command in thy name, to serve our will and thine own. By Lucifer, Beelzebub, Mephistopheles, Arcanes, and all the underlords we do entreat, let them rise.
Bob Clark went to Canada to do the post-production on Death Dream and fell in love with Canada. Something about it really appealed to him. He found it to be a young country, exciting country with, progressive things happening.
It was fresh and vital and liked the people. So that's how I became a landed immigrant, and that's where my career in the next 10 or 12 years happened, was in Toronto.
Black Christmas started off as a script called The Babysitter, written by a guy named Roy Moore.
The crux of the script was that, the babysitter's answering the phone, and of course it's coming from inside the house. Kind of urban legend spin.
Hello?
That turned into a script called Stop Me. Moore, hoping to make the film, just sent out hundreds of copies of the script to every production house they could find. The script got to a company called Vision 4, which Bob Clark was a part of.
The Babysitter probably as a script wasn't the most original idea, but I think Clark really took it and made enough changes to it that it really came out something quite different.
They rewrote it as a sorority house story rather than a babysitter story to get the kids out of it.
It was too violent for my taste. It was more of a slasher film when I first got it. I really wanted to emphasize the adultness of college students, their humor, their playfulness. To date, I didn't think college or high school students had ever been done with any sense of reality in American film. College students, even in 1974, are astute people. They're not fools. They're not. It's not all bikini beach blanket bingo.
Bob Clark added a lot of humor to the story. He added the Margot Kidder character's sort of, hilarious, drunken, foul-mouthed lines.
Did you know, this is a very little-known fact, but did you know that there's a certain species of turtle there's a certain species of turtle that can screw for 3 days without stopping?
And the character of the house mother, Mrs. Mack, is based on Bob Clark's aunt, who hid bottles of booze around the house.
She was based on my Aunt Mabel, the drinking part only. My Aunt Mabel was not nearly as goofy as our house mother.
Jesus, I wouldn't wear this to have my liver out.
The truth is, in Black Christmas, I probably rewrote half the script.
When Roy finally saw the film, he actually extremely approved of it.
He didn't want to go along with the idea of never seeing the killer, but eventually he bought into that too.
The CFTC had just been formed a few years ago, and we're starting to give out money in the form of loans to get films made, which was a very kind of unique thing in our history.
The whole budget of Black Christmas was $671,000.
That was like monumental to me. We evolved a budget, and they were very determined to get the best quality stars they could get. And I thought Olivia was the first one I thought of 3 or 4 years after Romeo and Juliet. I think she has a certain kind of integrity. We just made offers. She needed the work and liked the script.
On the day that she arrived, she said to me that she had gone to a psychic, and that the psychic said that she would be involved in a film in Canada, which would make a great deal of money and was a good film. And she told me about this, and I said, I hope that what you tell me is true, that I hope that it will make a great deal of money.
Thought I got no chance to get Keir Delays 3 or 4 years off 2001. His career was still going strongly.
The offer came into my agent, and of course I knew Olivia Hussey. I didn't know her personally, but I knew her work, and it seemed like a reasonably okay thing to do.
When we were making this film, I think from the time that I read the script, I knew that we had something very good.
Casting of Black Christmas in the end was kind of perfect, although it's not what it was intended to be at first.
Betty Davis was the very first choice for the den mother, and she decided not to do the film, so Miriam got the job.
Marion Waldman was a very interesting one casting, because Marion was basically a writer and had been a stage actress. And I knew her mainly because she had an office down the hall from me, and I had seen her work on stage.
Future SCTV icon Andrea Martin was cast for the part of Phyllis after comedian Gilda Radner had to withdraw from the project.
Gilda was already cast in the part that Andrea Martin took over, because Gilda got Saturday Night Live like a month before we started filming.
Margot Kidder had been in Sisters the previous year, which is a great film. It hadn't made her famous exactly. She wasn't Lois Lane yet.
Margot was wonderful, crazy as a bedbug. But by the time we built up Olivia Hussey, Keir Delay, we were getting some pretty good class. So I think everyone started to come out of the woodwork, and Margot was certainly emerging as one of the original talents. And Canadian, of course.
I was attracted to her because she was wild and out of control, and not the conventional leading lady, which was always the boring part. I remember when I did my homework back in the hotel on this one, and I can almost see the hotel room, the idea was, how far can I push this, rather than, whoops, that's not very safe. And Bob encouraged that.
Doug McGrath, obviously, from Going Down the Road, one of his probably most recognized appearances in a Canadian film besides that, and playing a dullard cop who has difficulty understanding phone exchanges.
I'd seen Doug. I knew I wanted him. He was cast without reading, I think.
What's this? Well, that's the number at the sorority house.
Bob Clark knew who I was because of going down the road, and he thought it would be wonderful, you know, if I would do it, you know, and he didn't know, but I was extremely happy to do it. You know, it was a good opportunity.
I started acting, I guess, basically 1968, 69, and this was the first really big, important feature film I'd been on. There wasn't many films being done, and you know, you could wake up on the first of the month, and I remember ACTRA used to have a phone, and you could phone that number and find out what was happening, and you phone and find out, and there's nothing happening. The part I was auditioning for, which I eventually played, was so small in terms of having any kind of scenes or anything that he asked me to read the part that Keir Dullea eventually played. And I read it, and when I finished, Bob kind of looked away and, you know, looked to the sky, and, you know, I can do it better. I can do it better. And he said, no. He says, I just don't understand why I didn't see you for that role.
It's said, it's almost axiomatic in the business, the script is everything. That's not true. The script is not everything. The actors are everything. And I can defend that. I've defended it with people who were passionate when I first said it, because I say one thing: give me a great script and give me 6 mediocre actors, I'll give you very likely a mediocre film. Give me a mediocre script and 6 great actors, I can give you a great film, and so can any other decent director. So while the script, of course, is incredibly important, the actors are equally important.
Arguably, the most important character in the film turned out to be the now infamous house, which was discovered on a Toronto side street after a long and exhaustive search.
That house is a character in the film. That house is, it is such a presence.
The horror film in general has a long history of creepy houses. You know, the house is often a character in a horror movie. The Psycho house, the house in The Haunting, there's a movie called The Old Dark House. And Black Christmas continues that tradition.
There was a very clear, strong vision that Bob had about what this picture was going to be from the very beginning. And that's very good, because when that's the case, there's something there for people to work against, to make decisions with.
I saw this little driveway and little private house. I had no right to do what I did, I guess, but I pulled in there, and that was it. That was the house I had to have. The people were very agreeable, kind of tickled pink at the idea. And inside, as a matter of fact, it was in fact a studio, and it was off by itself, well off the street.
It's got the film geography that the story needs, but more importantly, it's got the character. You stood on that little cul-de-sac road and looked at that house, and you knew there was something very creepy possible in there. We took that element and emphasized it very strongly in the picture.
I think I remember from the very first time I was on the set, I saw what the director was doing. I thought, that's what I want to do. So this was a chance to really study at the foot of a master, Bob Clark.
He was a young man who was totally confident in what he was doing.
When Bob came on to Black Christmas, I got a big kick out of him because he came in with like Rolodex cards every morning, which had the scene numbers written down and the shots that he wanted to do that day. And he was very organized, and I remember him always shuffling them around and what have you, but I mean, he had a definite plan.
I do map out each shot. Shot 1, shot 2 has a little card, 8x10 card, with the actors numbered, and the camera is a V, and I won't do a movie till I've seen my sets, till I've seen my locations, and I've rehearsed with my actors.
He had planned everything very, very carefully, storyboard, everything. And the moment he got on the set and described the shot to me, I understood exactly what I thought he needed and what the scene needed and how it was going to be filmed.
In order to maximize my quality, I had to minimize my waste. Time is everything for a low-budget film, so I don't want any of it wasted.
Bob wanted Edmund O'Brien, the Oscar-winning actor, to play the detective. I negotiated a deal with Edmund O'Brien's agent for him to come up 2 days before we needed him on camera, so he can get his wardrobe done, so he could do his thing. And I went to the airport to pick him up. And he came out of the airport in a wheelchair. And I thought, how is he going to play this part? But he got stood up out of the wheelchair, and I breathed a sigh of relief, and he walked towards me and we shook hands.
We went to visit with him for the first time after he arrived, and I sat there talking with him, watching for 45 minutes while he tried to put his coat on and talk.
We went into Yorkville to a restaurant to have a meal, and halfway through the meal, Eddie stood up and said, "I got to go to my room." I said, "But Eddie, where are you going?" He said, "I'm just going upstairs to my room." I said, "But Eddie, you're not in the hotel, you're in a restaurant." He didn't know where he was.
Edmund was just coming down with Alzheimer's when he took this part, and this man in 3 nights was going to have to go out in 10-degree Toronto storm weather out for that hunting of the young girl's body.
Finn and I looked at one another and thought, well, this man can't possibly play the part of the detective. What we're gonna, and we're 2 days away from shooting on it.
If he hadn't been shooting outside, I think I would have taken the chance with him, even though because he could do a line, but he was clearly losing it.
I had to go into Eddie O'Brien's room, and I had to tell him that he's not going to play the part. He insisted it. He said he was fit enough to play the part, and I said, "But Eddie, you don't even know where you are." And here was I, some young whippersnapper, telling this great actor, because he was a great film actor and he's done some wonderful stuff, that we couldn't use him and we had to send him back. It was very traumatic for me as well. And he burst into tears, and it was a very sad thing. If we hadn't got John Saxon at a moment's notice, we would have had to abandon the production. We had no completion guarantor on the picture, so we couldn't lean on anybody to help to come in and fill in the plug if we had to cancel the film.
I got a script called Black Christmas. I read it and I thought it was going to be successful. So I agreed to do it, and then a short while later, I got an apologetic phone call from Toronto, someone telling me, I forget whom, that a mistake had been made, that someone else in the production had cast the role, and they were very sorry, and I was very sorry too. I don't know how long later, maybe days, I got an urgent call from my agents. Could I get on a plane and go to Toronto today?
We got John Saxon. With great luck, John was available, and the same agency handled him.
Came up, got off the plane, went straight into wardrobe, got fitted in wardrobe, went into makeup, and was on the set 2 hours later, right off the airplane.
It was already, I think, midnight, and or maybe later, and I was driven out to a location. And it was a scene out in the park. It was cold, snow on the ground. And I started doing a scene about maybe 1:30 in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning.
There'll be 2 sets of dogs leading the way. Just spread out and follow them. So the first thing we'll do...
It was like 10 degrees that night. We were in a good blistery, cold Toronto winter.
From the film's compelling opening sequence onwards, Clark puts viewers in the mindset of the killer, Billy, by using a chilling subjective camera. This style would go on to be imitated in numerous horror films that followed.
There were many filmmakers who had used that killer's POV shot before, but that was the first time, I think, as a movie nerd, I was aware of that particular shot, taking the killer's perspective.
I think what they hit on, without necessarily even knowing they were doing it, is that classic budget restriction. You know, what you don't see is more terrifying than what you do see. The idea that the closest you come to Billy is an eyeball through shadow, a couple of shots of a bloody hand, and that voice. You create a logic to the film. You fill in the blanks of the movie much more effectively than they could have done in 1973, and much more effectively than people can do now.
I remember one movie, I can't remember, it was a 30s film where they did a moving camera subjective point of view for about 10 minutes in the movie. It's a reasonably famous movie. It's the only time I've ever seen it. Seeing that the one time, it was real clear the cameraman and the arm were not the same. I didn't want that effect.
I ended up making a body brace which basically allowed you to place the camera right on your shoulder, right here. And it was hinged, and it had like a safety belt at the waist which held it on. And it had a pad down the front, so it would allow, I could lift it up, and that would allow the camera to tilt up like that. When I read the script, we had all this POV stuff, and I said, you know, I think I could probably go over and even climb up that trellis with this whole setup. I know we did it the first day that we shot at the house. Once they saw that, they knew they had, well, you know, we basically got the right technique and things to use throughout the picture. Bob wanted to keep the audience on the edge of their seat. I don't think he ever wanted to really see who the killer was, which was the whole point of that. I mean, you only saw his shadow come in. At the very beginning, you see sort of the shadow of the head and that come in at the house, but you never, ever saw who it was. The magazine and the camera was more or less where my head was, so when the lights would hit me, you would see my shape on the wall, but you wouldn't see the camera because my body was actually hiding it. It was always my hands, whether we had the plastic bag in front of us or going crazy up in the attic.
This movie, I wanted a sense of we were being circled all the time. The camera, subjectively and objectively, was circling and closing in and filling in the spaces. And it's hard to do on a $400,000 movie.
He set it up where you actually see through the killer's eyes for most of the beginning of the film, that by the last half, he's then switching. Bob's able to utilize some of those techniques because then you're not sure later in the film whether you're looking through the killer's eyes or you're looking through the camera's eyes.
But only for a moment.
Every day we were putting track down or you know, boards, whatever we needed to do things, and part of the problem is keeping that stuff out of the shot itself, because a lot of the shots did 180, you know, 200 degrees, some 360s. In that house, I kept getting my shoulder bashed. As they went through the one set of doors, we'd be dollying through the other, and sometimes I wasn't quite in the right position at the right moment, and you hear this big whack, and the camera would go, take a bit of a spin.
The shooting of Black Christmas took place in Toronto in the winter of 1973-74. Though the budget was tight, there was a general atmosphere of fun and enthusiasm on the shoot.
I remember being picked up every morning, and Olivia would already be in the car, and I usually was disheveled and often slightly hungover. Olivia was very straight to me in those days. I remember trying to make her laugh, and I don't think I always succeeded. She was determined that she was going to marry Paul McCartney, and that was the height of Beatles stuff. And I thought she knew Paul McCartney, but she didn't, but she decided she was going to marry him.
We were filming one of the girls dying, and she was in a rocking chair, and they had me get a clear dry cleaning bag to put over her face after he kills her. And she's rocking back and forth, and the cat jumped on the chair on its own and started licking her mouth.
You go out there, something walks, cat runs across the set, something happens that you, oh my God, I've got to take advantage of that.
It's really frightening that this cat is trying to bring back his dead owner.
The snow technology wasn't then what it is today. And we ended up with a kind of foam that they used at the airport if they had planes coming in that lost their landing gears. We had to have fire trucks. They had to hook up to hydrants, and they put these great nozzles on the bottom of the fire hose and blew this stuff everywhere. And so you're sort of dependent on a fireman to know where you want the snow to go, first of all. And don't put it on the side of the house because it takes forever to get it off. The first day of a shoot at the house, we in fact did get some real snow the night before. And I remember being up there at like, I don't know, 5 o'clock in the morning to make sure that nobody arrived and went tramping across this snow.
The house mother, they decided that the way her death was going to be was on a meat hook, which is not glamorous. But of course, you have to have a harness on to be hung up so that the weight is on your back. A guy came from New York, came for about 15 minutes, handed me a lot of straps and said, here's the harness, gotta go. And I'm looking at this. I have no idea what to do with this. So I asked the second AD if he would mind that I use him. So he took off his pants, which is not something I asked him to do, but often I will say, you know, have Debbie take your clothes off, and everybody does. So he probably did too. And I strapped him up to see how it would work, and obviously it did.
The comfortable environment of the shoot was maintained by Clark, who gave small roles to many members of the film's crew.
Bob phoned me at lunchtime and said, I'd like you to come in after lunch. I need to have a chat with you. And then he threw this taxi driver thing. He had it in his mind all the time, but he wouldn't tell me until the day that I was going to do it. And he said, I'd love you to be the taxi driver. I said, sure.
Hey! Anybody there?
We filmed it quite late at night, actually. So I was there on the set much longer than I usually was.
If you take a look at the police officers in the park, one of them was a production manager. If you take a look at the guy that's on the Skidoo, that was Frenchie, and Frenchie was their prop master.
They said, we need more sorority girls for this scene. And so they said, you know, Debbie, come on up. And I'm like, oh, okay. And the house mother was opening her Christmas present of this nightgown that I had made for her. And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. You know, that's really nice.
I believe one of the producer's daughters is actually the girl that sits on Santa's lap in the Christmas scene.
Bitch.
He just has a knack for including all of these people into the film, and he cut costs that way.
Similar to many Canadian films of the time, an effort was made to disguise the Canadian locale in hopes of increasing the film's box office potential.
Using the American flag in Black Christmas is classic Canadian low self-esteem.
It was the done thing at the time to sort of make it seem like it was in America.
Anytime a Canadian producer was trying to make a film, they realized that their financial potential would be greater if it was able to travel well. They would camouflage the Canadian locale to kind of prove that, yeah, this is America, this isn't Canada.
They felt they'd be restricting the scope of the movie if they made it in Toronto.
It clearly takes place in Canada. I mean, there's a king can of 50 being drunk by Margot Kidder at one point.
There is a hockey game. There are snowmobilers.
Canadians are definitely going to recognize locations there. University of Toronto is largely featured.
Knowing that it's Canadian, you see those things, they kind of leap out at you. Those are kind of Canadian cinematic totems, as it were.
It made movies seem possible somehow, because it was made in a place that I was at least somewhat familiar with.
Unlike the slasher films that would follow, such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Black Christmas contains few shots of blood and gore.
It isn't really that interested in the killing itself. It's kind of, it is sort of oddly sedate and almost kind of chaste about the actual violence.
People have pointed out I don't pay off. I don't cut to Andrea Martin going, she sees it, and we cut. You don't even see Olivia doing Kier. There's a complexity to the movie. It's not just a movie to scare people. The one with Margot is the only one that is actually a killing. I fought very hard to find a way to make that suggestively and poetically violent.
It's me, Billy. It's all right.
I think Bob was very strong in his ability to understand what was frightening to people. He took the kids, put them on the front steps singing a Christmas carol while somebody's being murdered upstairs. That juxtaposition was very important to it.
When the glass knife is coming down, these little items on the shelf are jumping, which was actually a technical error. The size of the loop in the camera was not quite correct. In this particular case, it enhanced what we were doing. I mean, it was one of those lucky accidents. Never intended that way, but it actually turned out to be, I think it actually added very much to the scene.
Even as a kid, one of the things that I loved about it was not only terrifying, but it was really funny, and it was really darkly humorous.
I think my favorite shot in the movie is one where they're having that Christmas party for the disadvantaged kids, where Margot Kidder's letting some kid drink her wine.
It's a bit late to head out now.
I think the little bugger's schnockered, son of a bitch.
There's like a 15-minute long joke about fellatio in the film, which I think you wouldn't even see in a film today.
Could you give me the number at the sorority house? Please.
Yeah, sure. It's, fellatio 20880. Fellatio. It's a new exchange, FE.
It's a new one on me. How do you spell it?
Capital F, E, little L, L-A-T-I-O.
Thanks.
Don't mention.
One of the most memorable aspects of Black Christmas is the chilling phone calls of the killer Billy. The lewd, nonsensical calls make a strange reference to his sister Agnes and feature expletives that would make even today's censors blush.
I was always stunned at the vulgarity of the movie. I hadn't realized just how early that was and how little debate it caused. There was almost no furor at all over the use of many ugly words.
Using the C word, for instance, is always upsetting to see in a movie, and I think they're just kind of like it's sort of, you know, busting the taboo for the sake of it.
We've re-released the film on 2 DVDs. I've given copies to people for them to take a look at and to watch. The comment that's come back from a couple of women was, "Did you redo the soundtrack of those phone calls?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" They said, "Well, there's no way in the 70s they said those things that were coming out that phone."
They're really effective, creepy phone calls. You're thinking, well, if the guy talks like this, then what's he gonna do, you know, physically?
It's a confusion of voices. It's like there's sort of a multiple personality where there's a violence competing against itself.
I was a young actor here in Toronto, and I auditioned for Bob Clark. I sat in a chair in a couch and, you know, with my back to him so he could just listen to the sound of the voice and not look at me, and you know, and basically gave me the role right then and there.
A lot of the screaming and yelling is me.
Why are you doing this?
I did the voice actually standing on my head to compress the thorax, to give it that kind of slightly weird and spooky sound.
Agnes, it's me, Billy.
I was really struck with how there isn't a clear-cut explanation on the background or the reasons or the motives for the killer. And this is something that today's audiences would probably demand.
I have a very strong backstory about the killer and how he evolved, and there is a logic to the phone calls. It's very subtle. It's hard to follow. Billy is abusive and abused his little sister and was abused himself and probably killed his parents and probably locked her up in a basement for 5 or 6 years, and I think she escaped. And Billy doesn't like girls, and it turns out Agnes doesn't like boys.
Carl Zitterer provides an eerie, minimalist score to Black Christmas. A prototype version to the music is seen in the earlier collaboration between Zitterer and Clark in Death Dream.
The score is rather understated in contrast to contemporary horror films.
He and Bob really made a choice that it wasn't going to be contemporary music or like a contemporary score. There is music, but more it's musical sounds.
It helps to have Christmas music because something that's so cheerful and inane and familiar that it can be warped in interesting ways.
With Carl and I, we thought alike, and we had all the same ideas. So there's a lot of music effects in clocks and the things that make up the real world. I go to great lengths to put them in.
Who is that?
I just go out and listen and see what's there, and it brings a great deal of reality to a movie.
There was a review in Cinema Canada that said that the film was misogynist. The reviewer may have a point, but in retrospect, it really is the least misogynist slasher film ever made. I mean, you know, your main character is not only pregnant, she's planning on having an abortion, which in an American slasher film would be a complete death wish. It would be the virgin who, of course, lasts to the end to, you know, battle the forces of evil with her purity.
I don't think that the women are presented as victims. I mean, they're pretty resourceful and they take action, and it's really the men around them, you know, the cops who are pretty much inept and the boyfriends who are not very sensitive. So I think it was a little bit ahead of its time. It's still a little bit ahead of its time that way.
I certainly intended to make these young ladies affirmative and intelligent with character. They're not giddy. There's not a giddy one amongst them. Olivia particularly, she's a hero. Some people criticize me, God, you know, these movies, they always run back in the house. She runs back into the house as a great act of courage. She gets the poker to save her friends. She makes a clear, heroic, and depth of character decision.
Until the very end, the audience is left in limbo. While the police assume they've solved the case, a chilling revelation is made.
The fact that there is an open ending, that the killer isn't quite caught, that it could easily go on, is rewarding.
The irony in the end of this, everybody patting themselves on the back of Black Christmas, that they've, you know, solved the case. All the brains get together and determine that it's all finished, and it isn't.
You crave some kind of justice, you crave some kind of explanation, and you don't get it. This is before we had the whole trend of sequels, where an audience would go see this film, there's an open ending, hey, they know in a year they're gonna see part 2, in a year they're gonna see part 3, etc., etc. Well, there was never a Black Christmas 2, so the killer is still out there.
The very ending is cut up a bit, but I mean, that shot, you know, it took about 8 hours to light, and I think the shot lasted for over 5 minutes. And we did it 3 times and then went home. That was the day's work. But it started on a tight shot on Olivia in bed, and it came around seeing the people in the room and the camera holes and holes. And then it slowly starts to pan around, and you start to see the different rooms where people had been murdered. And you go all the way down the hall and then all the way up to the trap door at the very end. Physically, it was a difficult setup to do, particularly with the size of the gear and the equipment of the day. I don't know that doing the shot today, the shot itself would look any different, because I think, you know, what we were trying to accomplish we did, but how we would have gone about doing it would have been probably a lot easier.
Released in the winter of 1974, Black Christmas went on to a very successful run in Canada, grossing the second highest box office of any Canadian film at the time. It also became one of the first Canadian films to get a wide-scale American release. The film failed to match its successful Canadian run, however, when Warner Brothers decided to take things in a different direction.
When it went to Warner Brothers, they picked it up. That was great news for me. That was my first major distribution.
We went to the sneak preview, which was in Westwood, And we went with all the big wigs of Warner Brothers. The president of Warner Brothers was there, and all the sales officers were there, and the people, when they came out, they had to fill in these cards. And of course, Bob and I were extremely anxious to see what the results, but the cards were terrific. The Warner Brothers people were absolutely delighted.
Warner Brothers had taken the film for distribution, and they thought that the title was misleading, that people would think it was a film about black people at Christmas.
Black Street Fighter was coming out, Shaft and Superfly and so forth, and Warner was very nervous that they thought that this film, being called Black Christmas, would be mistaken for a blaxploitation action film.
They decided that they would change the title, so instead they called it Silent Night, Evil Night.
I was pretty much outside of it. They told me they were going to do it. They did ask me to change the ending, and I refused. They wanted to either do a reshoot, or it turned out that it was Keir Dullea, clearly, and how does the movie finish then?
They released it. It did not do well. It was horrible. The reviews were incredibly cutting of the film in the States.
They admitted they misstepped with it. The juxtaposition of that idea with Christmas was intriguing to people, and that idea of no horror film had ever revolved around Christmas before. So they lost that idea.
They actually went back to calling it Black Christmas, and they had all these posters that said Silent Night, Evil Night. What they did was instead of making brand new posters, they cut out snipes for the bottom half of the poster and stuck it on.
I think I saw the coming attraction for the film before I ever saw the actual film. And it's a remarkable piece of work. I can just imagine going on a first date to some action film or a feel-good romantic comedy and suddenly get this hurled at me. And it would certainly spoil any chances of getting to first base after seeing this.
Remember those idyllic scenes out of your childhood? Crisp winter nights, sleigh bells, crackling Yule logs? Remember those? Remember them well. After Black Christmas, they'll never be the same again. Black Christmas. If this movie doesn't make your skin crawl, it's on too tight.
Rated R.
It wasn't something that even though it was great fun to make, that I thought would last this long. Nothing's astonished me more. It's a huge underground classic. It's just wild. I still have tons of people coming up and asking for autographs for Black Christmas stuff. It's amazing to me. This was a long time ago. This was, what, almost 30 years ago we made this?
It is this weird little freak stepchild that's been buried in a basement or locked in the attic compared to some of the other horror films, just because of distribution and because probably it was Canadian and never really broke in the States the way it should have.
The video, I think, of Black Christmas was out of print for at least a good decade, and it wasn't really until, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago that interest kind of started picking up again.
When you think about the films that followed Black Christmas, and you think about Carpenter's Halloween, and you think about the Friday the 13th films, you think about the whole slasher genre of the late 70s and the 80s. I think a lot of those films did take their cue from Black Christmas.
Halloween pretty much was conceived as a sequel to Black Christmas.
He and John were working on a film that were about some murderous family from the Appalachian Mountains. That was a project that never got made.
John Carpenter had asked Bob Clark, are you going to make another Black Christmas? You know, that's one of my favorite films. And he said, no, I don't think I really want to. I want to go in different directions now. And John Carpenter said, well, you know, if you were going to make it, what would you, what would you do?
It'll be he was captured. After all, he was put in an institution, and the movie will begin the night he escapes. Back in town, and they don't know it yet, and I'm going to call it Halloween.
John Carpenter took that and ran with it, and of course Bob Clark was happy to let him go ahead and do his thing, so he added his own kind of spin to it.
He deserves the full expansive credit he's gotten for doing that movie. I mean, like I say, a few words about an idea are hardly a screenplay and a finished movie.
The film's current popularity was seen at a screening in December of 2004 in Los Angeles. A near-sellout crowd turned up as the theater screened a print on loan from Quentin Tarantino's personal collection.
It's an old movie that I'd seen a long time ago, and it's been a long time I want to see it again on the big screen.
It scared the hell out of me, and it scared me for years, and I still can't watch it without getting a little frightened.
Until Black Christmas was revived with a DVD release, the film's word of mouth was kept alive by the efforts of a number of fans on the internet, who even went so far as to hunt down the Black Christmas house.
It was weird after the movie to walk through the house and, see the closet where the first girl was murdered and put away with the plastic over her head. People knocked on my door and asked me if they can walk in and wanted to see the inside of the house, and they were very interested. It was a young guy from England, and his name is Dan. I know him by Danny. He became a very nice friend of mine, actually. And he was so fascinated with the movie, and this is his life. He came here on his honeymoon and just to see the house and learn more about Black Christmas, and he put a wonderful website on, and very nice to meet him and to see people so enthusiastic about this movie.
I realised that people hadn't seen this film, and that it just hadn't got the attention it deserved, and I felt that the only way I could do that, being just a small guy from England, was to put a website up. With the website, what I try and do is keep fans up to date on, on information like the screening of the new art, as well as providing a kind of multimedia gallery for people, sort of images and sounds and things like that. Just trying to recreate the experience of watching Black Christmas. By a long way, Black Christmas is my favourite film, and I don't know, I go to the video shop every day or, search the internet looking for something similar or, dare I say, better, but I can't see it happening.
I decided to build a website on the internet in late 1996 to really display my Black Christmas paintings. Watching the videotape, it ignited this inspiration in me to explore a painting or two of the house itself. The house seems to embody almost all of Bob Clark's horror. There's nothing I would change in the film except maybe Art Hindle's fur coats.
Rumors are circulating of a much-anticipated sequel to Black Christmas involving the producers of Ginger Snaps, Paula Devonshire and Steve Hoban.
Clearly, I'm of the belief we have to answer the ending. I don't think we can end the movie the way we ended it before. I don't think the audience will stand for it. I think they're going to explore Agnes in some length in the remake. Could be a killer twist. It could be a dynamite if it works out as I think they're going to work it out.
After completing Black Christmas, Bob Clark directed Murder by Decree before leaving the horror genre for films such as Tribute and the holiday classic A Christmas Story. But today, Clark may be best known for the 1982 film Porky's, the highest-grossing Canadian film of all time.